You are listening to Spotlight Sessions with Justin Bamforth. The program provides an inside look at the creative field through exclusive conversations with industry professionals. Every episode is recorded live each month in the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Check out the show links to learn more and join for free, or visit adobediscord.com and click on Adobe Creative Career. This episode was previously recorded before a live listening audience. My next guest, Galen Summer, is an Emmy-nominated filmmaker and founding member of the production company Public Record, where he directs and edits award-winning commercials, films, and television. And some of that work you may have already seen, like his latest series for Apple TV called Monster Factory, which explores professional wrestling and has won a Grierson British Documentary Award, along with a Sports Emmy nomination in 2024. His other documentary, Sidelined, about the controversial firing of NFL cheerleaders in the late 70s, had its world premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival and was even nominated for an IDA award. And of course, there's the 2024 Oscar-nominated Best Documentary Short Film, Death by Numbers, which Galen edited. He's also involved with brand campaigns like those for TriNet alongside legendary photographer Annie Leibovitz, not to mention the emotional campaigns he has crafted for Downy, CVS Health, Honey Maid. Needless to say, Galen has been in the film industry for a while, and so I thought he'd be an excellent person for us to learn from and become inspired by. So without further ado, Galen Summer, the spotlight is now on you.
All right, thank you very much. I'll do my best to be inspiring. I don't know, it's hard to sort of call that up on the spot, but I'll do my best. I'll do it for you, Justin. I will do it for you, Justin.
Hey, we're just going to have fun tonight. It's a very casual conversation. We got a lot to cover, but let's start with the very first question that's on anyone's mind whenever it comes to Hollywood or the entertainment business. What is the number one tip to breaking in, and how on earth did you get your foot in the door?
Well, I could start by how I got my foot in the door. So, I say that I've been doing this for 19 years. So that obviously dates me somewhat. You know, you get a sense of how old I am. But I started immediately after I graduated film school. I went to film school at Boston University. I say that one of the best things about film school, really, it's not about learning a camera or something else. It's really about meeting people. And I think maybe if there's a theme tonight, it might be people. So I'll throw that out there. It's about meeting people, and I met some collaborators, people who I still work with to this day. One of them is the executive producer of Public Record. He and I met in a film school class. He produced, quote unquote, my student film, whatever that means at film school. You know, he didn't have to raise money or whatever, all the awesome things that producers normally do, but he did sort of help pull it all together. An important aspect of the producing process. But yeah, we met and hit it off, and we've continued to work together, 19 years later. Having met some great folks in film school, I then went off and decided that I'm from Massachusetts, and I knew that I was either going to have to go to New York or LA. Maybe that's a little different, but we're talking 2003. This was in 2003. So at that time, it was really, you need to be in the places where things are happening, right? And so I felt like I needed to either be in LA or New York City. And I didn't want to do that yet. I still had this kind of dream that I wanted to live somewhere else. I wanted to jump back. I kind of knew I didn't want to be in LA. And maybe I'll get back to that. It's nothing against LA. But in my heart of hearts, I just knew that wasn't where I was going to put down my roots. So it's probably going to be New York City. So I wanted to get away from the East Coast. And so I had some good friends I met in film school that ended up moving to Colorado for a couple of years and just experiencing something totally different. And in terms of advice, I would also say that was an important thing. What I've found myself doing, documentaries, it's really about people. Right? It's about meeting people, talking to people, experiencing people's lives that are different from your own. And it was really great for me to go somewhere that was totally different, be exposed to people that, kind of had a different background, different way of life than the East Coast. So long story short, this is going somewhere. Trust me, Justin, this is going somewhere. I spent a couple years in Colorado, and I actually did get into it. We did some music videos out there. My buddy, we made a short film. My friend that I moved there with was actually a writer and um, stuff like that. And so I was still pursuing film out there, but when I decided, okay, it's time moving back I'm going to move to New York City. I managed to reach out to some friends who I knew from film school, and one of them got me a job, which was great. He got me a job as an assistant editor. And so that was sort of the first official job that I had, in the film or TV industry.
So that was your first job. It was the friend though who got you the job as the assistant editor, and from that point, now you got your foot in the door, right?
Yeah, I got my foot in the door. I got a chance to, as you may or may not have heard, New York City is a very expensive city to live in. So I had to, and I wasn't in a position where I could be, not worrying about the rent. I had to pay my way and I had to pay my rent. So, I got to do work as an assistant editor, kind of see what that was like. We weren't doing anything fantastically exciting. We were working on promos, if anyone knows what that is. But it's basically if you were watching cable or something else, we did things for like HBO, History Channel, A&E. They do a promo for the shows that you might want to check out. And so we would get an episode of, if anybody's seen the show Entourage, going back a few years on HBO, we would do promos for that show. And so while I was doing that, my buddy who got me the job is a fantastic guy. His name is Ed David, super talented, and he's actually a cinematographer now. Um, and he actually just filmed the show. Oh man, I should know the name of it, but it just came out on Hulu. It's a sort of a true crime murder thing. Mr. and Mrs. Murder, I believe. Well, he hadn't broken out into that, but he was like, "Hey, I got this camera. I want to check this. Let's do some stuff together." And I was like, "Yeah, man. Well, I want to be a director. I don't want to be an assistant editor for the rest of my life." Um, and so while we were sitting there, probably supposed to be working on something, we were probably supposed to be doing something, but we started talking about a project that we were going to do together. And I was going to direct and edit, and he was going to film on this new camera he was all excited about. And my point is that this project that I'm talking about, and I'll tell you a little bit about what it was the thing that kind of got my foot in the door as a director, because you really have to do something for anybody to hire you to do anything. You have to have a piece of work that somebody sees and responds to and likes to get hired to do anything. It's just the way that I think it works. And so we ended up hearing about this guy who has since passed on, sadly, but he was a Holocaust survivor, Brooklyn Taylor, who had come to Brooklyn as a young man, having survived the Holocaust, learned the art of tailoring, tailored suits for people like Bill Clinton, mayors of New York City, all these power brokers. But he worked his way up, and so we made a little short film that told that story. And this was in, again, dating myself a little bit. This was in the earliest days of Vimeo, if anyone's ever heard of that little platform. And we put it together. It was about an 8-minute film. Kind of, I interviewed this guy. He told his life story. I mean, he was an incredible storyteller. We filmed the people working with their hands in the factory. We're making suits and stuff like that. And I edited together this little piece, and it came out well. We were really proud of it. So we put it up on Vimeo, and almost immediately, Ed started getting responses to his cinematography. We started getting like some sort of attention from it, and it led to work for him, which was great. It led to some work for me too, and so kind of getting this piece out there. And it then went on to screen at some film festivals, and it played on PBS and stuff. But it led to then actual client work. So that was something that we didn't get paid to do. I think maybe we got together the money to like make it a couple hundred or maybe $1,000 at most to kind of hire some crew, and do it. But it got me my first, jobs I ended up doing a couple projects for the New York City Ballet. And I think, as you know, Justin, People out there, if they're going to hire you, they're looking to what you've done before, and they really kind of want to see exactly in your work, they want to see exactly what they want you to do for them, if that makes sense. So if you're going to make a car commercial, they want to see that you've filmed cars. um, I've gone on to do more commercial work, and I literally at one point was doing a commercial pitch, and um, our executive producer, who I said I went to film school with, his name is Jeremy Yakas. He sort of leaned over. He's like, "It's a really good thing you have people sitting on couches talking because they want to see that on your reel for this pitch." And I was like, "Oh, good. Okay, cool, cool." um, but you kind of have to show the work that you've already done is the thing that will get you your next job. And so the New York City Ballet was interested in, they were like, wow, we want to do a short film that shows our costume department. And it shows people how they make the costumes, how they sew these things. This was in an era, I mean, I don't know, I know that we have some 11-year-olds here, so you all are a bit younger. But anyone that may remember, there was kind of an explosion of interest in like maker films and things like that, where we were seeing, on Vimeo and other platforms, really like beautifully photographed, people just kind of making things. And so as in a way, our film about the tailor was that. There was nicely captured shots of people sewing and just the artistry of that kind of thing. And so the New York City Ballet saw that, and they're like, well, we want you to kind of do the same thing, but we want to do a film about the costume shop, and we want to do a film about point shoes. Anyone who may or may not know ballet, um, point shoes obviously are really a crucial part of what dancers wear to do ballet, and there's a lot that goes into making them. And it's a really personal relationship that every dancer has with their shoes. And so anyway, I did a little series of videos for them. And that was kind of my first like paying gig that had come from a previous project. And then from there, I got various other things, which we can talk about. But yeah, that was sort of my big break, I guess, so to speak. And actually, interestingly, it was the first documentary project I'd ever done. But from there, I kind of went on to do lots more of that kind of work. But I went to film school thinking, I mean, I didn't want to be Spielberg or exactly, but I was like, I want to make narrative films. This is what I'm interested in. Documentaries. Yeah, okay, sure. That's not my thing. Um, but then having done something, I found, you know, talking to people, hearing someone's story, there was just kind of a magic for me in someone's real story, their words, and finding a way to shape that, into a film.
A lot of times, young filmmakers and aspiring filmmakers, they have that challenge of like, all right, where do I begin? How do I start? And I think it was really cool that you posted that documentary on Vimeo, which I just posted in the show chat here, so people can watch that. It's called "Lessons from a Tailor."
Yep.
Let's take that for example, Vimeo, and then we have YouTube. What is better for filmmakers and like aspiring filmmakers to really get noticed?
That's such a good question. And I wish I had a more like up to date answer. I will say that there's something about between the two platforms. By the way, I watch a lot of YouTube videos and love that for various things. Um, to me, there is something about Vimeo that still feels like there's a curated aspect. There's like an aesthetic to it that seems to be, for lack of a better word, kind of going for art. They seem to be prizing, and so I think of filmmaking as art. It's not to say that the same tools aren't used to do various things, like make something really instructional about how to fix your kitchen sink when it gets clogged or something, right? I go to YouTube for all kinds of things. I'm a musician, just amateur as well, so I watch all kinds of stuff about bass playing and different things on there. I love YouTube. Vimeo, does seem to be going for more of a kind of a curated place to go to see, you know, art, art kind of content, like films, for example. And so I think that's still true. One of the New York City Ballet pieces I made got staff picked, And, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that's Vimeo kind of, which back then also kind of felt like it meant a lot. At least it meant a lot to me, but I think at the time there hadn't been years and years of staff picks yet. And so it was kind of like, oh wow, they liked this. They saw this. And it meant that other people then got to see the piece more, which helped get me some more work because, when people see your work, it kind of, that's sort of what you need to have one thing to kind of get the other. And so I think that's a really nice aspect of the Vimeo platform. Just is that there's somebody out there and I've met some of the people through various events at this point over the years that are working in their staff to kind of like the people who are doing the staff picks and things like that. And so I think and I see the work that I see on there is really high level of, kind of filmmaking. So, I'm not an expert by any means on these things, but there is something to me about that and what Vimeo is striving for. And I think if you have work that you're really proud of, it seems like a good place to put it out there. There are obviously other places that are not online, like film festivals and all these other things, which is a consideration depending what you're making.
All right. Well, let's talk about like some of your editing, because you said that that's, what you really started off doing, and then later you got into the directing. But like, how did your time as an editor shape the way you now approach directing? Was there anything that you learned that you just carried over and helped you in the directing chair?
Yeah, absolutely. I had the job as the assistant editor. I won't spend a lot of time talking about that. What I did take away from that was like, oh, these middle-aged guys that are teaching me about this, they're talking to me about 2-inch thick tape and all these other things they used to edit on in these like archaic formats. And I don't know if this is a world I want to be stuck in forever. And so I quickly found a job as an editor with a much sort of newer kind of company at the time. They were doing a lot of motion graphics, exciting work in After Effects. And they needed an editor they did a lot of work with green screen. And so they needed an editor to kind of cut together the live action or whatever it was. Sometimes it was an animatic. It was like something that was a rough 3D kind of render. And so as my job as an editor was to kind of shape the flow and the timing and the shot sequences, and then in this case, in this company, the real artists were the animators, the people who were the compositors, the people who were doing really beautiful work to kind of finish the thing. And I would help them kind of map out they were commercials mostly, what these spots would be. And so that was a really interesting experience to have, because it was actually in many ways my introduction to motion graphics, to kind of visual effects and just how that world worked. And so I did that, and it was a job. It was a good job to have. And so I did that for a bit. It was at a company called Shiloh, which no longer exists. But for anyone that's like around my age in New York City and was a freelancer doing motion graphics and things at that time, a lot of them knew that place or kind of knew the same circles of people. And so that was one thing that I did. And then really, I think the other part of it was editing interviews too, was a really instructive thing. And so I got into, like I said, working in documentaries. And so kind of learning, when you're editing, you're basically saying, what about this is good? What shot in this is good? What moment in this interview is good? What's usable? Right. And so I think how that helps inform you as a director is when you're sitting there, for anyone who has directed anything or just been on set, it's pretty chaotic. it's a pretty chaotic environment, right? It can be. And so it's a little hard. You kind of go, yeah, you have to kind of stay focused. But to have in your head an idea of what you're looking for, and if you're in an interview, what's actually going to be usable, be in that position where you're seeing everything in the kind of cold, hard light of day, right? Uh, and if it's not good, you're not putting it in. And so then when it came to doing my own projects, I feel like it gave me a better sense of knowing what I was going for because I could see as an editor, okay, I would use that bit. That thing that person just said, I would use that. That's usable. Oh, and they were looking right at the camera. That's amazing. We can use that. So I think it helped kind of develop that part of my brain, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And let's shift now to some of that more recent directing stuff. Let's talk about Monster Factory because that was a recent project where you directed it, but it was a series. But for a lot of people in the audience who don't know how these projects get started, like what was the process like developing, pitching, and ultimately getting that series greenlit to air on Apple TV first?
Well, it was a really long process, first of all. So I hate to break it to you, but the process for making these things is years long. And that's before you even start filming. For better or worse, that's just the way it works. When you get into the film or TV industry, you will quickly learn about something called development. And development is where you have an idea, you're doing things to try to flesh out that idea and get it to a point where you can pitch it to people. And then in the case of Monster Factory, we were partnered with a company called Vox Media. And some of you may or may not have heard of them. They do things other than film and TV. They've also done, whatever, journalism and podcasts and things. And actually was a producer there who came across a little school in the state of New Jersey called the Monster Factory. And it's a school where they train, and they're still operating and they're amazing. And the guy who runs it, his name is Danny Cage. And, I love Danny. He's amazing. They train people to try to become professional wrestlers. And it's actually, getting into the history a little bit, it's the first school that ever existed to train people to be professional wrestlers. And they started in the 80s. Danny wasn't doing it because he was probably a kid at that point. But he ended up taking it on later. And so this guy named Max at Vox said, reached out to us, basically a public record. He knew who we were. He'd seen some of our work. Again, that's an important thing. Your past work kind of gets you your next project. So he reached out and he said, would you guys be interested in developing this? And all he had at that point was someone had made a short film, which, by the way, was on Vimeo, had made a short film about this place. And it kind of captured the essence of like what might be interesting. And so we could see, this is the world. Okay, the world is this school. And man, it's scrappy and it's cool. Okay. And the people seem pretty interesting. Okay. So the first thing that happened is I and some of the other folks from Public Record went down to New Jersey and we just kind of visited. We met some people, we took some photos, and what we had to do basically was figure out, if you're going to pitch a show, one of the most important things you have to know is who are the characters. So we had the world, right? We knew it was going to be the Monster Factory. So that's where it's going to take place. This is the world it's going to be in, right? But who are the characters? And characters, more than anything, sell something. That's, I would say, something that I've learned to be true. So there were a lot of students at the Monster Factory. Don't quote me on this, but I think there were 50, let's say, at the time. And so then it began a process of, and I was the primary person leading this development effort. There were a lot of other, cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, because that's just the way it is with projects like this. We had some other executive producers or EPs, and everybody was fantastic, which is really helpful when everyone's kind of on the same page. And so, but I was the main person leading this effort, and so I personally reached out to everybody who we thought might be interesting. And we were trying to build a cast, for a show because we knew that the series, well, to back up a little bit, we had to think, well, what is this? Like, what is this thing? Is it a movie? Is it a series? Yeah, oh, okay. We kind of felt like it would be a series, and what might be best, because it was such an interesting place with a variety of people who were there, that it'd be the kind of show where it's like an ensemble, and you're following the lives and you're seeing the lives of multiple people, who interact, and they all come together at the Monster Factory, but they have their own lives, they have their own backgrounds, and the Monster Factory had this just true, beautiful kind of diversity, whether it was sort of socioeconomic, racial, just everything about the people, there were different people um, there. And that was what kind of made it really cool. And so we knew that we wanted to reflect that too, right, in our casting. And so we just started interviewing everybody. And so I would do basically this. I mean, we weren't doing it with like a live audience, but I did a bunch of Zoom calls, and or in person, but I live in New York and they were in New Jersey, so I couldn't just spend all my time down there. So I did a lot of Zoom calls with people and just kind of talked through their life story, basically. Um, their dreams, just kind of tried to get a sense of, okay, how would these people be as characters? And from there, we built a whole kind of pitch deck. We had the idea that it would be cool. The people, the studio executives who are looking at pitches, they see so many of these things. Um, and so you have to try to stand out. And so we decided we wanted to build a pitch deck that was like a magazine. So we actually physically built a thing, built this book that had photos and all the writing that I had worked on, and we had a designer that we worked with kind of put it together. But we just wanted them to have something that felt really tangible. Partly that's, I think, like our aesthetic at Public Record, and just what resonates with me personally is this sort of analog feeling to things. But we just thought we thought that would land really well. You'd walk in the room, we started pitching this show before the pandemic. And that is, at that time, it was still everything was kind of in the room. Now, in the entertainment industry, Zoom calls and pitches over Zoom have become much more common, for better or worse. That's the case. And so we knew we were going to walk into a room with someone, and we thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we hand them this kind of magazine we've built? And it had all our characters in there, and it had storylines that we felt like we could kind of map out. And it wasn't just what had already happened, it was where they may go. So again, to jump back to, this is a school where people are trained to be professional wrestlers. So they have not made it yet, but they're dreaming, many of them, of making it to the quote unquote big leagues, right? The WWE, AEW. Anyone that's a wrestling fan, you might know what these things mean. But, currently, if you're at the Monster Factory, you're kind of in the indie circuit. And, by the way, I knew nothing about wrestling when I started this project. I was, as a child, I was like a true sort of little child of the 80s. I was around when Hulk Hogan was doing his thing, and those other classic kind of, I guess they call it like the golden age of wrestling. I was alive. I remember it. I watched a few. I didn't really follow wrestling. But what hooked me was meeting these people and kind of seeing this world. And I just thought, this is such a rich world. I like these people, first of all. I kind of didn't expect to. I was one of those people who's probably guilty of stereotyping who professional wrestlers are, in a way. And I didn't realize that they were a lot more interesting than I thought they were. It's like you're as much a theater nerd as you are a jock, so to speak. It's
Well, let me ask you this real quick, because you had mentioned earlier that, the work that you've already done is what will get you your next job. So if you didn't have any experience or any knowledge in the wrestling world, how did that producer at Vox hear of you at Public Record, and why did he choose you?
That's a really good question. So he kind of came to us as a company, because as a company We had done various things at that point. I had done my film sidelined about cheerleaders, which you know, had whatever had come out, had screened at film festivals, had been on A&E, and then the other folks at Public Record, Jeremiah Zagar and Jeremy Yakis. Jeremy Yakis, the EP, Jeremiah Zagar is a director who I mentioned before, who had directed the film Hustle with Adam Sandler. He hadn't done that at that point, but he had done some other great work in documentaries and as well as narratives. And so we kind of all came together. They signed on to be the EPs, which means that they were like part of the creative brain trust. I was going to be the director because Jeremiah was doing other stuff. And so the folks at Vox said, "Yeah, we like you guys as a unit. Sure, Galen will direct, that's great. Jeremiah and Jeremy will be kind of part of the creative brain trust. They'll be the EPs. That's great." And so they had seen some of my other work, whether it was commercials or most of the commercial work that I did. So we mentioned that I did that film about the tailor, then I did some stuff for the New York City Ballet. I went on to do various commercial projects, but most of them were kind of rooted in documentaries, in real stories, whether it was real stories about people quitting smoking or real stories, about kind of different kinds of families, which is something I did for Honey Maid, and so all my work had kind of been documentary in nature, even if it was like kind of branded work. And so, yeah, I mean, it just kind of all, when we had a conversation also too, I mean, that's really important, just kind of realizing that you're all on the same page. So, yeah, so that's kind of, that's sort of how that happened.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's helpful too, because a lot of times we never hear about these behind the scenes things about how these projects get started, what the pitch process is like. And like you mentioned, it takes years sometimes to get these projects up off the ground. I mean, movie making is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Galen, but it seems to move at a very slow pace, and then all of a sudden it'll ramp up and it'll move at a lightning fast pace. Is that accurate?
Yeah, getting into production, it's like it's very slow until you get into production, and then, there's all the pressures of money and budget and all that stuff. But one thing in our case that also happened was the pandemic. We pitched it before the pandemic in person. We flew out to LA, I believe it was the fall of 2019. Flew out to LA, did pitches around, all the major streamers. And then we came back to New York to work with Apple. So again, I do want to highlight this based on what we've been saying. So part of the reason why we ended up at Apple, they were actually just kind of launching their streaming service and definitely their documentary branch of their streaming service, but the documentary executive in charge of all documentaries was the woman I had worked with to do my project Sidelined at A&E. She had been the executive of that. She had greenlit that. She had worked with me. The film came out well. She liked me. She liked us. So, and we liked her. And so we knew she'll be great. Her name is Molly Thompson. She's amazing. She's sort of I would say she's kind of a legend in the documentary community, I would say. And we knew that she would, be our champion on the creative sort of end of things. And so that was one of the reasons why we ultimately wanted to go with them. We did have meetings with Netflix. We sort of had it, that was a possibility to have gone with Netflix instead. But we kind of we trusted her so much and we liked her so much that we felt like we wanted to work with them on this series. And they were just kind of launching at that time their documentary division. And so, okay, great. They say, we love it. We love it, guys. And then there is a next step before we go into production, which is they give us just a small amount of money, just in filmmaking terms, a small amount of money, to film something that would be a development sample. And so they gave us that money, and then the pandemic hit. And so the last place you're going to go in winter of 2020 is a sweaty wrestling gym.
Yeah.
But we had to. We sort of, I mean, we didn't go in March, but we did get there. And so what we ended up doing, we did our best to follow every safety protocol, but what we ended up doing was filming some interviews and filming some things we just couldn't film normal practice, because normal practice is 50 people, sweaty people, like rolling all over each other, and they weren't doing that. That wasn't safe to do at that point. And so we had to kind of put together a pitch reel that was like this development sample that incorporated other footage to show that part of it, because we were like, well, a big part of the show will be seeing them in the gym, sweating it out. But we couldn't film anything that showed that, so we had to get a little creative. But that also slowed things down a little bit. It kind of slowed down the development process because it was a pandemic. So
On that note, too, because some in the audience may not know what this means. What is a development sample?
So we filmed some things, and we edited together like an 8-minute. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was about 8 minutes. That basically was almost like a teaser. Like a long, wasn't a trailer exactly, because trailers are much more fast paced, but it had that kind of energy, right? Where it's basically saying to you, you got to watch this, right? Yeah, you're trying to hook the viewer, and in this case, the buyer, in, and say, you want to buy this show because look at this character, and look at this guy, and this guy had such a, and this young woman. One of our characters was a young woman who hadn't even graduated high school, and actually in the show, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't watched it. You should all go check it out if you're interested. She hadn't even graduated high school yet, but she was one of the best prospects for the WWE, and so we wanted to kind of put our best foot forward, so to speak. Show them, look how many interesting, fascinating people are in this world. You want to buy this show. You want to give us money to make this show. And so that's really what the development sample is supposed to do. And we spent, I mean, in the end of the day, it was probably months crafting that. And the money that went into, the money they gave us. Well, I can tell you, they gave us about $100,000, but that money didn't really pay me. It like I kind of donated my time so that we could hopefully get a green light, and then then I would get compensated fairly. But up until then, it's kind of like you're hoping this will pan out, and our best shot for it panning out was to put as much of that money on screen and into our development sample as we could, like not to pay ourselves with it.
Once Monster Factory was greenlit, once it was underway for that first season, what was the creative process itself like? Being on set, working with a team, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, that was great. It was that I really enjoyed that whole 6 or 7 months, whatever it was, that we were kind of in the field. But so once it was greenlit, we then had to actually kind of staff up, crew up, if you will, which is like hire the people who are actually going to work on the show. And the way that the freelance nature of the film business is, like, the DP, the director of photography, who filmed the sample, wasn't available to film the show. We kind of knew would never film the show. Yeah, we actually knew he would never film the show. He was a very talented guy, Zach Mulligan. Well, two talented director of photographies, again, because of the pandemic. We did one shoot and then we had to kind of take a break and whatever. But two of them, Hillary Spira, who's a friend from from film school of mine, and she's super talented. I believe she shot the latest season of Daredevil. Um, and then Zach Mulligan shot Hustle with Jeremiah Zagar, as well as a really awesome independent film called We the Animals. And I mean, tons of other stuff. He's a super talented guy. He's a friend of ours, and so we were like, "Hey, Zach, come and film a couple days with us. Make it look good." We need this one, buddy. And so he did. We knew he would probably never film the show, and so once we got a green light, which we were all thrilled about, we then had to set about figuring out who is actually going to film this show. We don't want it to be a series of different people. I mean, this is my feeling. I want it to be one person who is the director of photography. Granted, you have other camera operators, you have various people on the camera team. When it actually came to filming the season finale, which was, I mean, it's not really a spoiler, but it all builds to a big show. The school puts on a big show, the biggest show they've ever done at an arena. And so we had I believe, 8 cameras going on that day. Yeah, so we built up to that. But the director of photography is the person who is basically, kind of leading that entire camera team, whether it's camera assistants, all the camera operators, all the different people. And it's kind of their vision, their way of how we're going to light it, how we're going to film it, obviously working with me. So we had to find the right person. And what I really wanted was someone whose background wasn't necessarily verite documentaries. And for anyone who doesn't know, verite is like when you just kind of grab a camera, more or less, and you run around with people, right? And you capture in the moment footage. That's verite. I wanted someone whose background was more like narrative filmmaking, because I also knew, getting back to the pitch, part of our pitch was we're going to follow these wrestlers. We're going to be following their lives in the ground. That's like one. We're going to have 3 different sort of components. Okay. One is following them in training. We're just in their lives. We're in the moment, right? We're going to have beautiful sit down interviews that we really go to kind of great pains to create an interview environment for. That's the second thing. And the third thing is because they are playing these wrestling characters, and we're going to use that as a way to kind of tell their story. And we're going to film those sequences with really high-end cameras, really fancy lenses, and we're going to treat that like a narrative film shoot, which is what we did. And so I knew that we were going to get there. And so I said, well, I know documentaries. I'm not worried about that part of it. I want a cinematographer who can do the narrative part of it, who can film and light beautifully these sequences we're going to do with our wrestlers. And so we ended up finding a guy, wonderful director of photography named Zach Cooperstein, who his background was narrative films. He'd done some acclaimed indie narratives, sort of an acclaimed Sundance horror film, and some other things that I watched. And I said, this guy's talented. And look at that shot he did. That's really interesting that he was thinking outside the box for that. And so I called up Zach. I happened to have a really good rapport with him. And he was like, I've never really done a documentary project. And I was like, you know what? Don't worry about it. We'll be fine. Because I just think it was his attitude. He had the right attitude, which is he just wanted to figure it out. Whatever the situation is, let's figure it out. Let's be scrappy if we have to. And so that's sort of one of that was an important component of the creative thought process was that kind of what I'm just talking about. We could have done this a totally different way, where we went in with a really more standard kind of documentary crew approach. For whatever reason, that's not what I wanted to do. And so once we got Zach, we then went about thinking about how are we going to then but as you said before, the clock is ticking now because we only have so much money that we have to allot. Once you hire people and bring them on, you can't just say, oh, by the way, take a week off and we're not going to pay you, or some kind of thing. It'd be nice if you could, but the thing is they'll have to go find other work. So once people are kind of part of your show, you have to have a schedule that makes sense where you are booking them for shoots and you're paying them, right? It's only fair.
Audience, let me tell you something. Like what you're hearing now, this is valuable information because this isn't the stuff you necessarily hear about if you go to film school. This is what you learn when you get the experience working on the projects. And on that note, Galen, like you mentioned that, that one DP that you brought on to this project who didn't have any documentary experience, but he had the desire to figure it out. Is that more what you're looking for? Is just somebody who has that drive, that desire to just to learn it, even though they may not have all the skills and qualifications? Would you hire someone who just is hungry for work, who's talented, and you recognize that potential?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In the right scenario, I think it also depends. I think you have to say that everybody's looking for something different, right? It just so happened Zach had no idea, or Zach. I don't think he regrets at all working on Monster Factory, although at the end of it, he was like, I don't know if I'm going to do another documentary.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not going to go on a huge tangent here. I apologize. But, as a director of photography, you have so much more control on a narrative film. And a documentary, you don't have any control often, right? It's like, no, this scene is happening now. So let's be there and capture it. He loved it. He absolutely loved every minute of it. But he was like, it's hard on my body. I'm running around holding this camera. I had a great time with you, but I don't know if I'm going to do another documentary. So the point is just, you never know whether if it's you're interviewing for a job or something. There's been so many jobs I haven't gotten, and you never know truly why you didn't get it. You like to think that it wasn't because your personality was so terrible, but it's really just what that person is looking for. I happen to be looking for exactly what I saw in Zach, which was someone who had the ability. I think it's a really great characteristic, personally, that someone who sort of has this willingness to figure things out. But if I was looking for the absolute slickest cinematography reel, it wasn't his. I mean, it's not that his work wasn't good, but there were other people we talked to who. But the interview aspect of it, meaning the kind of face-to-face chat that you have, is really important. And there were some guys I talked to, we talked to men and women for this project. And there were a few of them that I talked to who were very experienced, whose work looked great, but I got a feeling in talking to them that they weren't going to be willing to kind of put everything, kind of put it all out there. They weren't going to be willing to, and, to be, just sort of address this. Like, I'm not a tyrant. I'm not a jerk. I don't make people work themselves to death or something on set. But I do kind of want someone who's like game for whatever we need to do. We're a team. We're a team, and we're going to figure it out. So I got the vibe from Zach that he was down. And I talked to some other people who seemed, their work was good. They seemed really talented. I didn't get that vibe from them. And granted, like I told you, I was looking for this kind of needle in a haystack of a director of photography who hadn't done primarily documentaries, but was open to it. And like I said, it's just they're harder. I mean, it's a little cushier to just kind of sit there at the monitor and go, all right, let's move that light. And, I mean, I'm not, I'm taking the piss, so to speak, but like, that's sort of, there's a way in which that role, the director of photography role, can be that. In a documentary, if you're holding the camera, you don't get to just, tell everyone how to move everything around, right? You actually have to kind of, and this was a wrestling gym, so he had to run around. He literally was running. They were running up and down, and there were times where like, all right, get back out there, go. And he's like, I can't. Oh, okay, sorry, I forgot. I forgot what you guys are doing. Okay, no worries. We'll take a break. You guys can have a water break.
I want to touch on your company, Public Record. Why don't we explain to the audience what Public Record is and what it's all about.
Well, Public Record is a production company. We're a pretty small production company, and that was actually started by I was one of the founding members, and it was started by some people who were all kind of friends from film school, really, and or we had freelanced together, editing and doing other things, and so we had an opportunity to do a project that was really more of an editing kind of project, creative directing slash editing for Doctors Without Borders, or MSF as they're also known. So we had this opportunity to do a project with them, and the company got kind of formed around that need, So we were all freelancers. Suddenly it's like, okay, well, we're all going to work together and it's going to be a company. Okay. Maybe we need some office space. Okay. um, and so that was sort of the genesis. And then it was like, okay, can we get some more commercial work? Documentaries are great, wonderful. They don't always pay the bills, right? So we were looking for a way, even a filmmaker. I mean, if anyone's familiar with, Errol Morris, who's sort of a godfather in a way of the modern documentary, of modern documentary films. He notably has made a ton of commercials over his career, and some of them are pretty awesome. And so that was a way to sort of pay the bills and just have kind of steady work. And something that I've kind of said before and looked at is it's great to just have a chance to work. You get to practice working with a crew, being in the director chair, and I've always tried when possible anyway, on commercial projects to do something new that I wanted to do, even if it's something small. But I did one project where we used entirely this one lens that was a vintage Canon lens that's kind of nicknamed the Dream Lens. That was the lens that we filmed everything with, and it had a little bit of. It has this really. I don't want to get too camera nerdy, Justin. I apologize. But it has for anyone that's sort of whatever into this. It has this bokeh that's very blurry and painterly in a certain way, and that fit. When I did my pitch for the commercial, had a way to say, "Oh, we use this lens, and that's going to highlight the exact thing you want to tell in this, kind of story you want to tell, right?" And so, sure, it was a little bit BS. For me, it was an opportunity to like just try something a little different. And so I always looked at commercial projects as that sandbox in a way. You're getting paid to do it, but also can you do something that helps you work on your own craft?
Now, if you are new to the Adobe Creative Career Discord, I'd like to take a moment to share one of the coolest things we're working on right now, and that would be the Adobe Creative Apprenticeship Program. This program connects aspiring creative people like you with top creative companies providing the actual training and experience that you need, which also looks amazing on a resume. Think of it like the ultimate internship meets mentorship opportunity. But wait, that's not all. You see, there is another aspect to the program, and it's called commissioned projects. This is where you can get even more experience working on an actual paid project with Adobe. Yes, that's right, Adobe as your first client. Seriously. The details on the Creative Apprenticeship Program, the commissioned projects, and more incredible career resources can all be found at behance.net/resources. That's behance.net/resources. To learn more about tonight's guest, Galen Summer, you can check out his website, which I posted in the chat earlier. For those of you listening on demand, it'll be in the show notes. If we didn't get a chance to cover your questions, feel free to reach out to Galen directly at either his website or on LinkedIn. You mentioned that, before you started directing, you were doing editing work. And I know Adobe Premiere is basically the gold standard in editing. And you yourself use it in your editing process as well. But what are some of those features and workflows that you've come to rely on over the years that you like the best?
Yes, that's a great question. I have to say, and I have to admit that I'm still kind of getting up to speed with some of the latest features, especially the kind of AI powered stuff. One of the more recent things that when it came, kind of came about, I just thought this is really helpful, especially for documentaries, is the transcription, kind of text transcription aspect. So powerful. Like I said, I've been doing this for a while. Going back, I mean, just wasn't available, right? So we had all kinds of complicated ways that transcriptions happened, and then it was about time code and some producer. So imagine I'm in the editor chair. We've got a producer or whoever that's like, well, find this byte at this time code. Byte being, of course, like a snippet of dialogue someone said, and you're like, I'm punching in the time code. Oh, okay, right. It's so much easier now, and when that feature, which is not new at this point, but when that got rolled out, I just became a huge fan of transcribing. I actually will use Premiere, even to transcribe. If I'm feeling cheap or whatever, and I'm not going to pay for a transcription service, which are out there and exist. I'll just take a pre-interview. For those of you that don't know, that's something that we might do. Justin and I even did one more or less for this chat. I might do with a possible interview subject. When I was interviewing all the potential cast members for Monster Factory, with their permission, of course, I recorded those calls, and then I could take something like that and run it through Adobe and transcribe the audio, and then make a text document or something else, and just have an easy way to go through that conversation. So it's great for even just stuff like that. But when it comes to editing, I just find that to be one of the most useful things that sort of recently come around, and I use all the time. And it, sometimes, again, there are all these new tools. AI is changing the world, right? But we used to have to find, if you needed somebody to say a certain, like, you wanted to edit a phrase, right? Sometimes this conversation may need a little editing, right, Justin? But if you needed me to say like this and that, you might need to find me saying the word "and" in a way that worked for your editing, right? Because you're trying to chop down, you're preserving the integrity of it, right? You're not trying to make anybody say something they didn't really say, but you just have to edit it down. And so we would have to search through, the audio to find a word. And so to just kind of be able to do it via text and find those words, is really like kind of sped up the dialogue portion of like editing interviews, which, is something that I find to actually have spent a lot of time on. So I mean, that's sort of one of my favorite things. I also am a big fan of, watching the dailies, essentially. So if it's a documentary, right? It could be all the B-roll, all the different beautiful shots that have been filmed, and just kind of sitting there and watching it. I remember reading, for anybody who knows the filmmaker Terrence Malick, has heard of him. I remember reading a story once about when he was editing, got the time in the editing room making his films, and he was making a film, one of his films called Thin Red Line. And I read in the story that he would sit and watch the dailies with no sound and just listening to Green Day.
Oh,
And my point is just like, I like to kind of just sit there and absorb the footage and just look at it and see it. If it's purely visual, right? We're not talking about an interview or something. And then and just lay down markers, hit my shortcut is M for marker, and just hit a marker on anything that is a good moment, or even really specifically, it's like this is the shot we want, but the camera really perfectly starts to pan or tilt or racks, let's say you did it a couple times, you're filming something of a tabletop kind of shot of a plate, or I don't know what kind of thing we're making here, right? Right, but whatever. And it's just the perfect moment just to kind of watch through and see that stuff. And then when I'm editing and I need the B-roll, I come back to it. I kind of can step through all the markers I've made to all the best, sort of the best of the best, if you will. And it's time consuming, but I think it's really worth just sitting and watching everything if you can, you know? Um, and that's an art that I think can kind of be lost, or it's a thing that can be lost these days because it's so easy to kind of scrub through and really quickly move through. In the old days, editors literally had to watch, they kind of had to watch it all, and it was harder to stop the film playback, you know? Um, but I think it's really important to kind of sit with the imagery or whatever it is and feel out what are these moments that actually resonate with you as you're watching them.
Getting people to talk in camera, let alone feel comfortable talking on camera is not easy. There's this art to the interview, and you've mastered that. But what is your approach to the interview itself, and how do you ensure that you get the very best out of the interviewee?
Well, thank you for saying that. I don't know if master is fair, but I'll take it. I appreciate it. You're probably demonstrating a bit of what what I do, which is you make people feel comfortable. You don't want. I've interviewed a lot of. What I haven't done. I'm not a journalist. I never studied journalism. I didn't go to journalism school. I've never really been in a journalism environment. So I've never been in the like hardball, like the White House press corps or something where it's like, you got to give me that quote now,
Right.
right? So everything often what I've done is talk to people who aren't that used to talking on camera. Sometimes they are. Usually when people are used to it, it might be a worse interview. You never know. But it's a lot of making people feel comfortable, making them feel safe. Kind of letting them know it's a safe space, in whatever way you might actually put that. And that's what I find is a big part of it. Whether it's a documentary project or a commercial project, because I've done that kind of. I mean, let's be honest, it's kind of a strange thing to, on behalf of a brand, some global brand, to sit someone down and say, I'm interviewing you, right? They know they're there to please the brand, and everybody knows that. We're all part of the same, like, it's nobody's fault or something. It's not, but it is like they kind of know, oh, well, I don't want to screw this up. I don't want to do a bad job. I don't want to say the wrong thing. So I basically just try to make them comfortable and say, there is no wrong answer, right? Like I'm here to make sure you succeed. And that's what I'm trying to do. I think anything you can do to feel like a human. And I often I've thought about this, and I've kind of said this before, that I often try to ask the stupid question. I don't try to make myself seem smart. I don't try to intimidate anybody because I know that, okay, typically my voice is not part of the interview. So I don't have to worry about whether the audience is going to hear my question and think, "Ooh, what an erudite speaker. What a wonderful question he just asked." I can seem like a complete, lovable idiot, perhaps. And that actually gets a better response out of people because then they think, oh, okay, I got to explain this to this guy, right? I have to really kind of break it down, which is a word I often use for people if they're just kind of not getting deep enough into something. I will say like, well, break it down for me. Really break it down for me. What are we talking about, right? And um, it is about, once you get past the comfort part of it, often I find you're looking for people to tell a story. And if you're doing the kind of interview, which is not like this, this is a conversation where, you're part of it, I'm part of it. But if you weren't going to be part of it, it was just me, you need me to tell the whole story, right? And so I'm often endeavoring to do that and get people to really take me through. Okay, we're talking about that moment when this happened. Okay, take me back there. What was it like? What did you feel? What were you thinking? Really break it down for me, and I'll often, if it's something really important, I'll often end up having them I don't just ask one question, let them give me whatever answer they give and move on. We usually have to kind of talk through it a bit more, to get to really get really the best stuff. Which, maybe we have to do here. I don't know. You
No,
tell
no,
me.
no.
You tell me.
Our only challenge is we don't have enough time. That's our challenge.
Right.
I mean, if we could do a long form broadcast, oh my gosh, it would be amazing. How do you decide though on which project to work on next? Do you have an agent that helps you find work, or do you find it yourself? I know you mentioned people come to public record, but how do you go about finding the next project?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It is, it's tough. In some ways, it's tough. I mean, I'm not gonna lie and say like it's a tough industry. There's a lot of competition out there, and I will go from one day thinking, great, hey, woohoo, we got an Emmy nomination to, yeah, will I ever work again? I don't know. We'll see. And um, typically, there is nobody knocking down your door, right? No one is typically people, unless you're maybe a handful of people, and it's literally a handful, I think. If we're talking about documentaries, which is really the world that I'm in, who, you know, have such a track record and do so many things that they could probably get almost any project made, and people are coming to them with various things. You have to just kind of be out there. You have to be looking for stories. I have a project I'm developing right now, which, again, if this goes anywhere, will have been a years long process. I actually, I was interested in okay, put it this way. Sorry, I'm going to back up a little bit. So I like to research, you have to kind of research things. You have to kind of say, what am I interested in? Look into it. And I've done that before. That was how I found the story of the cheerleaders that I made a film about, was researching. And so I was interested in, I'm not going to talk too much about the project because, just because of the stage it's in, who knows, but I was interested in the concept of prison pen pals. Having had some personal experience with my mother, actually had a pen pal who is still in prison. I actually just talked to her the other day, and she mentioned him, and he's still alive, and he's in prison. But all when I was growing up, this guy would send us Christmas cards, and they just had a very friendly relationship. So I was curious. I was intrigued by that as I got a little older, um, as a story concept. And then a couple of years ago, actually right before we made Monster Factory, I started digging around just really generally and hit upon a story that had to do with prison pen pals. And it was this really overlooked and kind of unknown story. And I just kind of on a whim was like, well, can I find this person? And I did. And then I talked to her. And so that's the kind of legwork that you sort of have to do. I mean, it's wonderful if you happen to know personally some amazing famous person or someone who's done some incredible thing, and you can just email them and say, "Hey, let's make a documentary about you." But, for the most part, you have to kind of find these stories. And so and to be fair, for me, those are the stories I love most, are these kind of overlooked, underknown, just, you know, things you haven't necessarily heard about. And so that's what this story was for me. And and so I found this person, tracked her down. We had some Zoom conversations. Like I said before, I recorded them. I ran them through Adobe Premiere. I made transcriptions. And so we have now gotten to the point of starting to, pitch this idea around, basically. And it's a story that's been long gestating because I kind of connected with this person right before I made Monster Factory, and then I went off and made this show, and I didn't have any bandwidth to do anything else while I was doing that show. But then since that show, I've been working on various things and have done some other things in between. But this would be like my next sort of long form project.
I love that concept. I mean, because it's, when we think about the prison system, like, yeah, it's a broken system right now, and a lot of people just, they don't want to talk about it, right? But yet they're human beings. And I love this concept because you're going back to the heart of what it is to be a human, to have that communication, to have that correspondence, to that there's so many different ways you could take that concept. I love everything about it, and I wish you the best of luck with it. That's
Well,
phenomenal.
thank you. Thank you. I will say the story gets wilder from there. I won't spoil it for you, but you know, it isn't just writing a few letters back and forth. But yes, it does start with her saying, just because someone's in prison doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad person. I thought that was an important part of this, to just know, okay, that's where you started from, being open to the idea that someone's made mistakes, they deserve another chance.
Looking ahead into the future, because we hear all the time that, like, oh, movie theaters are dying, the industry's changing, AI acting is going to ruin everything. But being in the industry, where do you think the future is headed, short term, long term, for movie making and storytelling?
Yeah, that is a good question, and I wish I had a crystal ball.
Or I should say this:
Yeah.
what about trends? Trends that you're taking note of,
Mm-hmm.
things, little signs here and there that are kind of coming up.
Well, I think it's really hard. I mean, I think that AI is going to have a massive impact. It's, having been in this industry for 19 years at this point, more or less, I would say it feels bigger than anything I've seen, in some ways. And it's hard to know what impact that will have. But without digressing into some big, I think it's something a lot of us, everybody in every sphere of life, is thinking about, right? AI. But I think that in documentaries specifically, there's going to be a desire for truth. There's going to be a desire to tell stories that are about people. If we get into some weird place where somehow, AI is hoping to have stories told about AI for AI, then, like, I don't know what that story, that future is, but people, I think, will want to have stories about people. And whether we're using AI tools as a part of it, it could be. I think that on the negative side, if we could sort of look there for a second, it could mean, just knowing the experiences I've had, I could imagine that the people who are putting money into projects are going to sort of say, well, AI should make everything cheaper, so let's give you less money to do what you're doing, right? And that's just in a super broad way, in whatever capacity. And maybe that's fair. I mean, I think there are a lot of areas where AI might streamline certain processes, and so it will be cheaper. It'll take less time. Perhaps it'll take less people. I don't like to think of it that way, because that's, for me, a little depressing, to think that less people will be needed. Going back to one of the first things I said, some of my best memories and sort of, experiences in this industry have been working with people. So I don't like the idea that the industry might become a person sitting in their basement doing it all by themselves. It's great to have a lot of power in your hands, but I think that the magic really comes from people working together. And so that would be, perhaps that'll be one. I think it's almost certain to be one of the challenges, is that budgets might go down because people will say, well, you don't, or studios, executives, whoever. Not to say they're not lovely people. You're all lovely people out there, but we'll sort of say, well, the reality is you can do these things cheaper now, so maybe we don't have to spend as much money to do this, and I could see that being an effect. Obviously, those tools are really powerful, and I think for narrative filmmaking for films, I mean, if you look at something like Marvel movies, for example, which I'm neither a huge fan or a huge detractor of. But if you look at those, a lot of it is computer, CGI, computer generated imagery anyway. And so whether it's AI or humans making a lot of this stuff, in some ways it's six of one, half a dozen of the other. Um, that sort of those films may not change tremendously. In documentaries, it's a little more complicated because it's supposed to be showing something real. And so and I know there are a lot of conversations and different things happening in the various corners of the documentary world where people are saying, well, how does AI fit into this? If you have somebody's voice saying something they didn't actually say, you know, granted, we as editors might have hacked together your words to have you say something that wasn't quite what you said, but, was close to the meaning of, but we wanted it to sound great, but we chopped it up. Well, you could just wholesale have somebody say something different if you had their voice, and could sort of, work with their voice. And I think there's a lot of ethical, things to think about there. From the perspective of kind of the storytelling and the art, what a powerful tool to have. I don't have to go back and say, which happened actually making Monster Factory. I went back to one character in particular. I went back multiple times as we were deep into the editing, and I was like, hey man, can we just I just want to have you talk again about, was one part of his story. Could you just talk about that again? Just say this. I basically got to the point where I was like, could you just say this exactly for me, please? And he was like, okay. I mean, he didn't have a problem with it. I wasn't making him say something he didn't believe, but we needed it to just make our edit work. Well, there's a world in which you won't need to do that anymore, right? So I could see that being useful, but yeah, I mean, I think there will be continue to be a place, I hope, for telling, real stories about people, stories that are based kind of on truth and kind of real experiences. And so maybe the tools will change, but the goal and what we're trying to communicate as storytellers will hopefully stay the same.
Wise words right there, and a lot of information that we covered today. I hope you in the audience found it informative, insightful, and inspiring. Just want to say, thank my guest, Galen Summer, for joining us tonight to discuss his incredible career journey. Be sure to connect with Galen on LinkedIn, check out his company, publicrecord.tv, and visit his website at galensummer.com. And if you enjoyed this program, catch all the latest updates for the next spotlight sessions and all the great content we have here in the Adobe Creative Career Discord by following the upcoming events calendar at the top of the server so you can see what's coming next. I also would like to thank my new show producer, Catherine Chu, Lisa Temple, moderator Elizabeth, and the entire Adobe crew for sponsoring this program and helping to bring it alive. And thank you, Discord community, and to everyone who tuned in to listen to me, your host, Justin Bamforth, aka JBam. You can always catch me on Discord, LinkedIn, or my website, justinbamforth.com. Until next time, everyone, take care. For more conversations with creative professionals, subscribe to the Spotlight Sessions podcast or check out the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Links are posted in the show notes, or visit adobediscord.com and click on Adobe Creative Career.